The state didn't find him through a border patrol. It found him through a login timestamp. He is 19 years old, sitting in a room with no window, watching a cursor blink on a terminal that isn't supposed to exist. Behind him, the machine that tracks every citizen in the country is still running. In front of him, a line of code is rewriting his own file inside it. One keystroke, and the system will believe he never left. One mistake, and the system will know exactly where he is. But here's what the surveillance officers 3 buildings away don't know yet. He didn't escape the network. He's still inside it. He built the door out of the same code they use to keep everyone in. How does a teenager erase himself from a state that tracks its citizens down to the hour? And what happens when the machine notices the gap where a person used to be? He grows up in a mid-sized industrial city, the kind state media calls a model of self-reliance and everyone else calls forgotten. His father repairs radios for a living, which in this country means his father is one of the few people licensed to touch anything with a circuit board. The boy learns soldering before he learns to ride a bike. At 10, he is handed down an old computer donated to his school under a foreign aid program nobody advertises. It runs an operating system built domestically, cloned from software the state does not have the rights to and does not care that it doesn't. The machine is slow, the software is locked down, and every application reports back to a central monitoring server by design. Most students use it to type essays about the leader's childhood. He uses it to read the manual. Not the student manual, the system manual, buried in a folder nobody bothered to hide because nobody expected a child to open it. He does not yet know the word for what he's doing. Later, people will call it reverse engineering. At 10, it just looks like curiosity with no off switch. By 13, he understands the tracking software better than the technicians who installed it. Every machine in the country's computer labs runs a background process, logging keystrokes, flagging banned words, screenshotting the desktop at random intervals, and sending the images to a server in the Capitol. He does not disable it. Disabling it would trigger an alert. Instead, he studies its blind spots. He learns which processes it ignores, which file types slip past its filters, how long a gap has to be before the system flags an idle machine as tampered with. He is not planning an escape yet. He is building a map of the walls. At 15, his talent gets him noticed the way talent always gets noticed in this country, through a teacher who reports it upward instead of encouraging it quietly. A recruiter from a technical institute visits the school. He's invited to sit an exam meant for boys 3 years older. He scores high enough that the exam proctor asks him to redo it, certain of a mistake. There is no mistake. The offer comes wrapped in language about honor and service. What it actually means, he understands within a week of asking careful questions of an older cousin who already lives inside that world. A seat in a state cyber program, training to breach foreign networks, steal currency, move it through accounts that don't exist on paper, and disappear the evidence. Some graduates end up moving money for weapons programs. Others end up watching their own countrymen's screens for the rest of their careers. There is no version of the offer that ends with him choosing his own life again. He says yes, because saying no is not a real option available to him. And from the day he says yes, something in him starts working a different problem in the background, the way his mind has always worked more than one problem at once. If he can read a system well enough to find its blind spots, he can find his own. Training begins in a compound outside the Capitol. 3 years of instruction disguised as an elite academic track. He learns network intrusion, cryptographic methods, how to route traffic through compromised servers in countries that will never know they were used. He is very good at it. He is good at it in a way that earns him access most trainees don't get, including limited supervised time on machines connected, briefly and under heavy filtering, to systems outside the country's firewall. This is the opening. Not a door left ajar by accident. A door the state itself installed. Because you cannot train someone to attack foreign networks without occasionally letting them look at foreign networks.
He starts small. During one supervised session, meant to study a foreign banking interface for a training exercise, he spends 90 extra seconds doing something that looks, to the monitor watching over his shoulder, exactly like note-taking. It is not note-taking. He is mapping how the country's own identity verification system talks to its provincial travel permit database, information he has pieced together over years from fragments, now confirmed by a foreign security research paper he was never supposed to be able to read.
Every citizen's movement between provinces requires a permit, cross-checked against a central registry. The registry does not update in real time. It syncs in batches, once every several hours, from regional terminals to the capital. Between the moment a local record changes and the moment the central system reflects it, there is a gap. Not a large one. Long enough, if you know exactly when it opens and exactly what to write into it, to make a person's file say something that isn't true yet, and have it become true by the time anyone checks. This is not hacking in the way foreign films depict it, a dramatic breach with alarms blaring. It is patience. It is understanding a bureaucracy so completely that you can predict its exact moment of inattention and step through it like a man crossing a road between headlights. He spends the next year building the tool in pieces, small enough that no single piece looks like anything. A script here, disguised as a debugging utility for a legitimate training assignment. A cached credential there, memorized rather than saved, because saved files can be found. He tests fragments of it against low-stakes internal systems, where a glitch will be blamed on infrastructure, not sabotage. Each test teaches him something the last one didn't. The tool, when finished, does one specific thing. It can generate a travel permit record that appears, from the central system's perspective, to have been issued legitimately by a real provincial office, timed to land inside the sync gap, so it exists in the registry before anyone downstream would think to question its origin. It will not make him invisible. Nothing makes a person invisible in this system. But it can make him look for a critical window, like someone who was always supposed to be exactly where he is standing. He does not build an escape route out of the country. He builds an escape route through the parts of the country that are hardest to move through freely, toward a border region where the actual physical crossing depends far more on geography and guards than on paperwork. The code isn't the escape. The code is what buys him the hours he needs to reach the place where an escape becomes possible. There is a cost to this kind of preparation that has nothing to do with code. Every day spent perfecting the tool is a day spent inside a program designed to make him into exactly the kind of operator he is trying to stop being. He is, by his own training, becoming more dangerous to the state with every month that passes, and more valuable to it for the same reason. The better he gets at his real assignment, the harder it will be to ever let him leave the compound unescorted again. He understands. He is running out of time before his own usefulness becomes a cage, with no gaps left in it at all. The chance comes from an assignment, not a plan. He is selected, along with 2 other senior trainees, for a short technical rotation at a facility near the northern border, tasked with hardening a regional server against the exact kind of intrusion he has spent years learning to perform. The irony is not lost on him. They are sending the fox to check the locks on the henhouse. The rotation gives him something training never has, A legitimate, state-approved reason to be near the border with his hands on the exact regional system his tool was built to exploit. For 3 days, he works late, ostensibly stress testing the server's defenses. In reality, he is confirming, one careful query at a time, that the sync gap he mapped years earlier still exists in this specific facility's configuration. It does. Bureaucracies do not update themselves any faster out of caution. If anything, this one is slower than the version he studied. On the second night, he does something that will only make sense in hindsight. He flags a real vulnerability in the server, a genuine one, unrelated to his own plan, and reports it up the chain exactly as his assignment requires. It costs him nothing, and it buys him something valuable. A supervisor who now trusts his diligence completely at the exact moment that trust matters most. On the third night, he stays behind under the cover of finishing his report. Alone in the server room, he does not hesitate, because hesitation is the one thing his years of preparation were meant to remove. He writes the permit record. He times it to the sync window, down to the minute, a window he has now watched fire correctly 17 times in simulation and twice in careful live testing. He logs the change, then logs out clean, leaving no trace that looks different from a technician closing a routine session. He walks out of the facility that night the same way he walked in. Badge scanned, exit logged. Nothing unusual. What is unusual is what happens 2 hours later, in a registry 3 provinces away, when a document appears showing he has already been cleared for regional transit as part of an approved technical assignment. A document that did not exist when he woke up that morning, and now looks, to anyone checking, like it always had. He has not escaped the country. He has escaped the paperwork. What's left is the geography, and the geography is the part no code can solve for him.
He moves at night, on foot for the stretches where a vehicle would draw attention, following terrain he has memorized. From satellite imagery he was never cleared to see, and found anyway. Buried in a training archive nobody thought a student would think to search. He carries almost nothing. Carrying belongings is how people get remembered. The forged window buys him roughly 36 hours before anyone at the compound would reasonably expect him back from a completed rotation. 36 hours is not generous. It is exactly enough, if nothing goes wrong. And everything about the last stretch of any border crossing in this country is built around the assumption that something will. What he could not forge was a guard's mood. 2 kilometers from the river, a patrol stops him, not because his papers are wrong, but because a border officer profiles anyone traveling alone at that hour, regardless of what their documents say. For a moment that stretches far longer than its actual seconds, his entire plan rests on a piece of paper that technically should not exist, yet being examined by a man who has no reason to doubt it, and no particular reason to trust it either. The officer radios it in. This is the true test of the tool, the part no simulation could rehearse. Not whether the record exists, but whether it survives being checked in real time by someone with the authority to escalate. The central registry, queried live, returns exactly what he built it to return. A technician, cleared for regional movement, assignment on file, nothing flagged. The gap has not closed yet. The officer waves him through with the particular boredom of a man who was hoping for something more interesting than a compliant technician with valid paperwork. He reaches the river before dawn. The crossing itself is almost anticlimactic after years of preparation. A shallow stretch chosen precisely because it is shallow. Cold water to the chest, current manageable if you know exactly where to enter, which he does, because he spent as much time studying terrain maps as he spent studying code. On the far bank, he is not free. He is exactly where every defector from this system ends up, in a country that will not protect him and may return him.
carrying nothing that proves who he is, except a story too specific and too technical to be anything but true. It takes contact with a foreign aid worker, a nervous week of movement between safe locations, and a great deal of very careful, very technical explanation of exactly how he got there, before anyone with the authority to help him takes the story seriously enough to act. Back at the facility he left, the closing of the gap happens exactly as he predicted, just slower than he'd hoped. His assignment's expected return time passes. A supervisor, the same one he'd earned the trust of 3 nights earlier, makes a call to confirm his status, only to find the paperwork trail leading to a rotation he was never actually reassigned to. The registry that told a border guard everything was fine now tells an investigator that nothing adds up. The gap he exploited does not stay hidden. It becomes, retroactively, the exact evidence of how he did it. A fact that will change how every regional server in the system handles its sync windows from that point forward. He is gone by the time anyone understands what happened. But the system he escaped through learns from him almost as fast as he learned from it. He resurfaces months later in a country that will actually let him stay, under a name that is legally his now and was never his before. What he built to escape becomes almost immediately the exact skill that makes him valuable to people trying to understand how the system he fled actually works from the inside. He does not go back to hacking foreign banks. He spends his time instead helping researchers and analysts map exactly the kind of infrastructure gap he once exploited alone. The sync windows, the blind spots, the specific bureaucratic inattention baked into a surveillance state that has to process millions of records with only so much processing power to do it. Every gap he explains is a gap that gets patched somewhere else in the system, which means every explanation he gives makes the next person's escape a little harder. He carries that knowledge like a debt. He knows exactly how his own success changes the odds for the next teenager sitting in a computer lab, reading a manual nobody thought to hide, mapping the same kind of blind spot he once mapped. The state does not stay still. It never does. Within 2 years, reports surface that the country has overhauled its regional sync architecture entirely, moving to a faster, harder-to-exploit real-time verification model. A change quietly attributed, in the parts of the world that track these things, to exactly one incident. He becomes, without ever intending to, the reason the next person's gap will be smaller. What he never gets back is simpler than any of it. No message from his father, who he has to assume faced consequences for a son the state considers a defector and a security failure in the same breath. No way to know if the technician whose trust he earned 3 nights before crossing the river ever faced a reckoning for a story too specific to disbelieve and too damaging to admit. He built a door out of the exact material the state used to keep him in, and someone always pays for the door being found, even when the person who built it is already gone. He does not call what he did heroic. He calls it, when asked, the only kind of math he had. A system built to track a population down to the hour has to trust its own records completely, or it cannot function at all. That trust is not a flaw someone forgot to fix. It is the one weakness a surveillance state can never fully close. Because the moment it stops trusting its own paperwork, the entire apparatus stops working for everyone, not just for the person trying to disappear through it. Somewhere in that country tonight, another student is sitting in front of a machine that reports everything it sees, reading a manual nobody thought to hide, and finding a gap nobody has patched yet.